I should not be whispering right now. So this is what we're going to go through today. So you guys can go on to this link. It's 46alks.com/workshop-CFI. And this contains a lot of different links that you might want to keep, and it contains everything that we're going to go through today. And these are the preparations that Brittany has sent you in the chat. And this is a little bit of what we're going to go through today. So we're going to be talking about URL, request, response, status codes, docs, get and post, authentication, formats as JSON and XML, maybe others, and open data. So if any of you are like, oh my God, I don't know what this is, it's totally fine. We're going to go through this together. Have patience, ask questions, because this is actually, I think we might be here for like an hour, and this is an hour dedicated to you, for you to learn. So please ask questions. That is how I learn as well. So honestly, please ask questions if you have any. So why and when to use APIs? Does anyone know what the word API stands for? Does anyone want to unmute and shout out what it stands for? No one knows? I can hear that. Yeah?
Application programming interface.
Yay! Yes, exactly. Perfect. Thank you, Anna. I can hear it on your voice that it's you. I have actually said this wrong in a workshop a couple of times because it doesn't say a whole lot to me. Application programming interface. It doesn't really contain a meaning to me still, with working with APIs for like 2 years now. So I can understand that the word API, it's not as easy to understand. But what APIs actually do, a couple of the things that API does, it's open up access to data. So API, you can imagine that around you as a person, there's a lot of data. You have your social security number, you have your address, you have the number of pets, what kind of TV you have bought at the electrical store. There's a lot of data circling around you as a person. And then that data might be stored at the tax office, for instance. That's also data about you as a person. And it's also different authorities. We have a Swedish authority called Länsstyrelsen. That's for like the forest, the different regions in Sweden. There's a lot of data there as well as Sweden as a country, for instance. And all of that data before APIs, I can't really say a year before APIs, but before APIs, the actual process of extracting that data and using that data on, for instance, a website or in an app that you have created, or in a school project, or if you're writing a paper, you want data. That's what all people have in common. At some point, we do need and want data. And before APIs, you actually had to call an authority or an office somewhere and say, hey, I want this and this data filtered in this and this way. Can you please send it to me on email? And then you got the data in a CSV file or Excel file or PDF or some kind of file that you had to actually upload manually, for instance, on a website. And when that data has past its expiration date, then you had to call them again and ask for a new file to be sent to you to be uploaded. And that's kind of a manual, slow, not that efficient process. So what an API does is actually it takes real-time data and it gives it to you. And it can actually translate different kind of data types or formats. So it can be talking to one system that talks a different language, and it can kind of translate. Everything is dependent on the API itself, what kind of API it is. But that is one way that APIs actually open up access to data for us as people. So we can use APIs to benefit us and help us with our day-to-day life. And then we also have automation, access to systems. So imagine that for me, for instance, when I go to the dentist and I book an appointment, and that appointment might be like 1 month in the future, the day before I need to go to the dentist for my booked appointment, I will receive an SMS that tells me, oh, remember, tomorrow you have a dentist appointment. That is actually a form of automation. So it's never a person sitting there with a cell phone sending an SMS to you. That's a way the dentist offices has automated the process of actually getting their clients to come to their appointments in time, because that actually in the end saves money for the dentist. So what they have done is that they have connected an API like our API that can send SMS, and they have placed that in the dentist systems, and someone, a developer perhaps, have instructed that API that you can go in and fetch this information from the calendar and this information from the dentist records. And you can send one SMS. And that's all the API is allowed to do. So that is automation and actually accessing systems at the same time. And then you have layer on top of complexity. That is something that an API also does. So here we can try and imagine the stock market, for instance. They can never shut down what they do. Their data is dependent on it always be running. And it's the same for banks, actually. They can never shut down their systems. They can never say, oh, sorry, guys, we need to close for 2 weeks because we have to replace our systems because they're too old. The banks, they actually like build on their old systems and try and figure out new ways to adapt to old systems. And they have a really complex infrastructure because they can never shut down and do it from scratch. So what they can do with an API is they can actually, on top of their already really complex structure of different systems talking to each other in different ways, they can place an API on top of all of that. And they can instruct the API that it's allowed to go into this system, fetch this information, go into this system and fetch this information, and presented to a bank manager. So that is something that APIs can do as well. They can be used as a layer on top of complexity. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question. What are some of the most complex ways that you've used APIs?
Some of the most complex? That's a really good question because there's so many different APIs. So, for instance, our API is strictly about telecommunications. So it's SMS and telephony and MMS, for instance. But a different API could be used as a search engine. It could be used as Spotify has APIs, for instance. So there's so many different APIs. So it's hard to say what kind of complex way you could use them, because I guess it's all in your imagination, actually. Like what you ever can think of and get it to work, then it's probably possible.
Okay.
It's like a non-answer, but I can actually not think of a good answer. So
No,
it's
that's
this,
great.
everything is possible.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
that is something you learn as a developer as well, that you always get that answer. Yeah, sure, it's possible. It might not be the right way, but it's possible. So it's a hard world to kind of limit. Some of the I realized for this workshop that I had a lot of tips for Sweden, but I know that it's not only people in Sweden now. So I've tried to figure out different tips as well. So we have a couple of tips of where you can find these different APIs. And actually, it's just a Google search away, and you can probably find APIs as well. But I wanted to recommend a couple of gathering or collections of APIs that I know about. So we have this public API list on GitHub. That's a really good list because it only allows for open APIs to be there. So these are APIs where you don't have to pay any money for them, as I understand it from the list. And then you have them sorted in different categories. You have animals, and you have cryptocurrency, and development, and disasters. And here, if you scroll down a bit, you can actually see how you can talk to this API, because there's different ways of talking to different APIs as well. And that's a thing that we're going to go through as well. So this is a really good tip for anyone that's trying to figure out how can I use APIs. And then we also have, this is a Swedish authority actually, the Agency for Digital Government in Sweden. They also have a collection of APIs, so you can search here for nature. And then it will pop up a lot of different APIs for different data about the nature. So if you're writing a paper about the Swedish forest, then this is a good place to look. And then we have, this is not, I actually don't know. I wanted to say that it's an open source kind of thing, but I know it's a community that's doing this on their spare time, as I know about. So this Trafiklab, it's a collection of traffic and collective traffic in Sweden. They have gathered all of the different APIs about traffic in Sweden. So if you wanted to, because the way it is today, it's that you have to download an app for this region and you have to buy a ticket there. You have to download an app for a different region and buy a ticket there. And that's not really super efficient. So if you wanted to, you could, with this, you could actually code an app on your own or a website or something that might be able to allow all of these different regions that you're traveling through to buy tickets from all of them, if it's possible. I do not know, but probably. So that's a cool collection as well. And then we have Jobb Tech Development. That's a group that is employed by the Swedish Arbetsförmedlingen. So the place where you go to look for work in Sweden, this is their development department. And they have actually done a couple of APIs themselves. So it's up for grabs if you want to try and do something to look for work in Sweden. So you could probably code a website or something, or do like GET request and get the data that you want to and need to have. So that's a cool collection as well. Does anyone have any questions?
We have a question in the chat. Sorry, I'm whispering.
Totally fine.
Tongi, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Asked a
Oh
question.
no, I'm sorry. I was trying to make a joke. I'm really sorry. It's not a real question.
Oh, okay.
I appreciate the effort. I cannot see the chat at the moment, so I only see my own screen that I'm sharing with you guys. So
Wait, can
I
you
appreciate
explain the joke? Because I don't get it.
Because there is a food and drinks API from the public APIs.
Okay.
Then there must be an age limit on drinks. So how do you check for your age when you use that API?
So now I get it.
I love having workshops late at night because it actually brings out this kind of this mood. I love it. So if you have any questions or jokes that you want to be told, please unmute and ask them or tell them. It's totally fine. So to go on with this, an example of an URL, because this is something that we need to learn to understand APIs as well. URL, you might have heard this word before. It's an address out on the internet. And that is how we were able to find all of these different API collections, because they have different URLs. So this is the URL. This is a different URL. It might be very forthcoming once you know it, but not everybody knows this. So exactly as I have a home address, every API out there has a home address out on the internet as well. So an example of an API URL is this. It's this simple, actually. But we're going to go into, and I want everybody to do this together. So if Anna is out there, I cannot see her right now. But if Anna's out there, then you can post this in the chat as well. So we're going to go into a site. This is a Swedish site. I did not have time to translate it. I'm sorry. But it says welcome here. So we can go into this URL together. Everybody can do this on your computer as well. And it's not a very pretty website. And it's supposed to be like this, just to show you an easy example. So it only says in Swedish, it says welcome here. But what we are going to do now is that we're going to copy paste this, and we're going to get out our Postman client, and we're going to try and do exactly the same thing in Postman as well to see what happens there. So if you have your Postman client, it might look something like this. It might look a little bit different. It depends on different versions. Once you try it for the first time, it's usually a lot of like different sites here and stuff. You can just close that. And what you want to do is find a plus like this and just press it. And you will get a new session. It's called in Postman. So look in Postman, try and find a plus, and try and get to a point that looks something like this. We should all get there. So if anybody gets lost, just holler at either me or Anna in the chat, and we can guide you guys. So we paste in our URL here. Did someone have a question? No, then I continue. So we paste our URL here, and then we press this big blue button, send. And what we have done now, I just want to say this as well, what we have done now, we have done a GET request to this URL. So we have actually gone somewhere to fetch data on this URL. That is what we have done, a GET request. And what we do get, it's my Postman is a little bit big so you guys can see it. We get an answer from this URL. And this looks a little bit different than it does on the actual website when we go onto that in our browsers. But if we go back to the browser, and I'm using Google Chrome, you might be using something different, so it might not look the same on your computer. But I can right click and then I can press view source page, I think it's called in English. And then we can see that we have exactly the same answer here as well. So what we are getting in Postman here and what we are getting by viewing the source page is actually that we get to see the HTML that the website is built in. And this website, when we look at it like this, it's not that informative, it's not that pretty, and it's supposed to be like that. It's the most simple kind of website you can do out on the internet. So here you can see the HTML, and you can see the phrasing that's also in display in the P paragraph. Does that work for everybody? What Postman? If I don't hear something, I'm gonna assume it's a yes. So otherwise, just mute and ask. So what we did, as I mentioned, we did a GET request. We were asking for data from somewhere out on the internet. You can do this in Postman with regular websites, and you can do this in Postman with APIs, for instance. And what we are going to do with the API is that we are going to do a GET request with the API as well. And it's exactly the same process. But if we look here in Postman, something to know about, and we are going to talk a little bit more about this as well. Once we did this GET request, we get a status 200 OK. So just remember to look at that when we're doing different GET or POST requests. Just try and remember to look at what kind of status code did I get, because the status code is going to guide you. And we are going to go through what kind of different status codes there is. But before you start talking to an API in Postman or with code, it might be helpful to know what happens or how do I research how to use this specific API? Because you might be after this, you might be wanting to try a different API. And then it's helpful to know what you're looking for, to know how to talk to that API specifically, because you can talk to different APIs in different ways. And this is just a showcase on how to talk to our API. So what you want to know about is that you can contact the people that has provided the API. You can often reach them in different ways. Stack Overflow, it's the developer's Bible. Every developer is on Stack Overflow 80% of our time to look up things, because people ask questions, and you can also ask questions on Stack Overflow, and I guarantee that you'll get an answer. So it's good to know. And then you also have different people. You can go to meetups, to hackathons, you can discover different forums. If you have a friend that's a coder, you can probably ask them and they know also. But otherwise, you can Google. This is something that we learn as developers as well. It's how to Google better. So remember this or sneak peek on this page later on, you want to be looking for API reference manual, API documentation, API docs, API manual. There's a whole lot of different ways for the instruction manuals to be titled. But so this is an example of what our API documentation looks like. And we call it docs. We call it API docs. We could have called it API reference manual, for instance. And because you can see here that this is specific to our API, but you can see here there's different instructions for when you want to send an SMS, receive one, forward one. There's also instructions for MMS and phone calls and numbers and all of this kind of different things you can do with our API is going to be here. It's like an IKEA instruction manual of this API. But if we go to overview, so you guys can also go on here in your browsers. So if we go to 46aux.com/docs/overview, then you can see here, this is just the instruction, the base instruction of the actual API. So you can see here that we were talking before about every API has URL out on the internet, a home address. And this is the base URL to our API. So it's simply this. And we can copy that, and we're going to post that in Postman as well. Paste, not post. So if you guys have found that URL, or if Anna can write that in the chat, and then we're going to paste that into Postman. And once you've done that, you're going to press send. And I'm going to find a charging cable for my computer while you guys do that. Does that work for everybody? Does someone want to unmute and say yes?
It's working for me.
Yes, nice. So if it doesn't work for anybody, ask questions in the chat or just unmute. So what you can see here is that we did another GET request to a different URL. And the response that we got now, it's API access requires basic HTTP authentication. Read documentation or examples. So we have just looked at the documentation. Here you can find the instructions on how to talk to this specific API when you want to do something. And also, as I mentioned before, look at the status code. That is probably going to tell you a bit more about why do I not get access? What do I have to do? So we're in this together, so we're going to do it together as well.
One question for you, Carolina.
Yeah.
So when I put in that API, I got a different message. Just for
Oh,
me,
you
it
did?
shows, yeah, somewhat. I'm not sure
What answer did you get? Could it be that you got in like a space before the URL or after? Because that happens sometimes as well.
Oh, I actually have the wrong URL. Sorry about that.
Oh, you do? No worries. So
Okay.
does it work when you write just this URL?
Yes, now it's correct.
Yeah. Okay, cool. But it's good just checking. So it's the same for everybody because it's going to make more sense in the end, I promise. So now we are on the path to sending an SMS to ourselves. We're just learning how to do it and how it works. So if you gotten this response in Postman, you can also see the status code that says 401 authorization required. So if we go back to this workshop page, we're going to look a little bit more on the status code. So there's I would say it's mainly 4 groups that you need to be mindful of. So a status code that's something along the way with 200 means everything is okay, you have gotten the answer you can get. When it's 300 something, it might be look somewhere else. You're not looking in the correct place right now, so you have to try and do something differently. And then you have the 400 something, and that is you're not doing this right. Please check the documentation, the manual, the API reference manual, or ask somebody for help. Or you have the 500 something, and that is actually when we are doing something wrong. You might have seen that you can get the 500 internal server error message at some point. And that is, it's something wrong on our end, on our website, on our API. Look back in a couple of minutes and we should have sorted this. So there's 4 groups that you need to think about. But if you are uncertain on the status codes, and this is my favorite website out there, you can always go into this website and you can have a look for what does this status code mean. So we got the 401, and that means unauthorized. So please keep this one. It's really nice to be looking at sometimes when you try and do something. But what the status code that we got, authorization required, it's actually saying that we need to identify ourselves before we can do something with this API. And identifying ourselves means to use something along the way of an ID card. So we need to identify ourselves with either credentials, API keys, and do that with basic auth, with this API specifically. So we are going to log on to our 46Alts accounts. So if you guys can bring those up, I'm going to log into my workshop account. So in order for us to get our API keys, this is also, I should mention this is a common mistake as well. The API keys are made up of username and password. And it's not the same username and password you use to log on to your account. In this instance, your 46Hours account, that's not the same. It's a different set of credentials. So if you are on the dashboard on your 46Hours account, you can scroll to the bottom. And here you will see the API credentials, and it says username and it says password. These are the credentials or the API keys. They're called different things in different places, but these are the API credentials. And they usually, of course, depending on what kind of API you use, but usually there's some kind of long string made up of different letters and numbers. And that is how an API key looks. So we're gonna take this and we're going to add them into Postman so we can identify ourselves and we can actually get into the door of the API, because right now we're just knocking on the door and we're not allowed to enter. We need to add our key and then we can go inside the API. So what we're going to do now is in Postman, when we switch to that, we're going to press authorization first. And then here we're going to click basic auth, because that is how we need to identify ourselves with this specific API. It might be different with different APIs. So there's a lot of different choices. But in this case, it's authorization and it's basic auth. So if you click that, you're prompted to use your username and your passwords. You can just copy paste. And sometimes it might sneak in like a space either before or after. So if something goes wrong, check if there's a space at the end or at the beginning. And here you can actually just double click and you can copy, and we're going to paste that. And once we've done that, we're going to press send to see if it's working or not. So I'm going to do that. And this time I got a status code that says 200. Okay, you've gotten the answer that you can get. And you can see that here as well. Hello there, you authenticated correctly. Does that work for everybody? Does someone want to unmute and say yes or no, help?
Once you enter the username and password, do you click send again, or how?
Yeah, you click send again because you're doing a new GET request now with your keys. Does that work?
Yep, that works for me.
Awesome, cool. So if it doesn't work for someone, just check if there's a space either in the password or the username or in the URL. It has happened to me a number of times. It's totally fine. You learn from your mistakes. So I'm going to keep on going and just shout out if there's something that you need me to show again. What we're going to do in Postman now is that up until now, we have only done GET requests. We have only fetched data or information from somewhere. Now we actually, in order to send an SMS, we actually need to post data. So we're going to do a neat little package where we have to write the address, to who are we sending this, what are we sending. So we're going to do a post request this time. So in Postman, you just press here on get and you change that to post. And then in order for us to actually sign, seal, and deliver this, we need to press body, and then we're going to press X www form URL encoded. So if anybody is lost, it's post, body, and X www form URL encoded. And here we're going to write our key value pairs. So if you've ever done something with JavaScript, you might have heard this before. Key, value, and that's a pair. So these two go together. So it's more, you can say also it's a headline and it's a p tag. You always have a h1 and then you have a p tag, for instance. And it could be something like this, a key value pair. So you have the title, you have the key, and that key has a value. So that could be my address. And that's my actual address. But we are going to send an SMS. So we are going to need 3 different keys with 3 different values. So we're going to need the key to, from, and message, because that is what you actually send in an SMS when you write an SMS on your cell phone. So we're going to write to, from, and message. And what it needs to be here now, it's the two, and this is what I mentioned before. Not everybody might have heard me, but depending on what country you are in right now, there might be different limitation to different operators. So if it doesn't work this way for you now, you can actually try and send me an SMS on my number, because we know that works with the Swedish operators. But what you need to do in the to value is you need to write the country code like this before you send an SMS. Otherwise, we can't really identify where you are and where's your cell phone. So you need to write a plus before. And for Sweden, the country code is 46. And then you remove the first 0. And then it's 703855735. So if it doesn't work with your number, this is my actual telephone number, so you can send me an SMS. I'm gonna quit the do not disturb mode so I can hear your SMS in case you want to do that. And this is a cool thing. Here, when you send an SMS manually from your phone, you're sending it from your cell phone number. But we're going to do this with an API, so we can actually send it with a text sender. So we're going to add that, and I'm going to add the text sender as workshop.
Can you repeat that? You're going to send it with a text sender? Is that?
Yeah, exactly.
What?
So
What is it?
that's a possibility you can do when you're sending an SMS with our API or a different API. You can actually send it with the text sender. So if you got any commercial SMS, it might say a store's name instead of a telephone number. I don't know. It's really different in different countries. I don't know if you have that in the US.
Yes, we have something similar, but I was just making sure that workshop, what that was, but it sounds like workshop is a part of 46 Elks. Like
Workshop is more, I could have written Carolina here. And that would have been, when I have received the SMS on my phone, it's going to say that it's from Carolina. But
the workshop was from, you wrote workshop because that's what we're doing now.
Exactly. So we're sending an SMS from the workshop, but I might as well have written Carolina. The limitations here is that it has to be between 3 to 11 characters in the text sender, and it cannot start with a number. And that's the only limitation here. So you can be creative. But I'm going to write workshop so it makes sense in my phone afterwards. And also a limitation there, if you're ahead of the class and try something, if you send it with a text sender, it will not be possible to answer from your cell phone because this text sender is not connected to a different cell phone number. So it cannot receive a text from your phone afterwards. Just so you know about that. But I've written workshop. You can write something else and try it out between 3 to 11 characters. And then the message I'm going to send is, we're live. So has everybody done this? And if you have, you can try and press send. And it will not work. It should not work, actually. But we still get the status code 200 OK. And the reason for it not working right now, you should not have received the text, even if you're in Sweden and have a Swedish cell phone number, is that in the URL, we actually have to instruct the API on what kind of different part of the API that we want to use. So if we wanted to make a phone call, we would have written an endpoint, it's called. We would have written an endpoint on the base URL. And the endpoint is actually the last part here. So if we wanted to make a telephone call, we would have written calls. We're going to send an SMS. We're going to write SMS. So once you added the endpoint SMS, then you can try and press send again and see if it works. And it just pinged for me. I don't know if you guys can see this, but I just got an SMS from Workshop. And in Postman, you should also get this kind of response. So you get some data back from the API saying that it's created, it's outgoing, it's from Workshop. So you can see these key value pairs that we inserted as well. So yeah, we got some more SMSs. So I guess there's some people that it didn't work for with your cell phone number, and then you can just try and input my cell phone number because it might be the limitations in different countries with different operators. And that is why the SMS is not going through. Thank you for an interesting one. Thank you. Is it working for everybody, or does someone have questions?
Mine doesn't seem to be working, and I think I typed in your number correctly.
But Clifton, you had a US number, right?
Yes, but which is why I switched over to your number, because
Oh, it's not working then either?
no, at least doesn't seem to be. I'll try again.
We have Anna with us, or we should have Anna with us. Could you maybe check Clifton's account otherwise? If
Yes,
there's
sure.
something there? Yeah, cool. So we can just check that everything is okay on that end.
And we got a question in the chat. Mine says 403 forbidden. Is it due to the number?
That actually, I'm not sure. It might be a number of different factors.
I might
So-
know.
Yeah.
I think Enrique tried to check for the if you have spaces at the end of the values. You cannot have spaces at the end of the values, so that might be the problem.
Yeah, exactly. So try and like that's what we do a lot as well as developers. If something doesn't work, then you have to check each step just to make sure there's no spaces, no different weird characters somewhere. So it might be spaces here in the URL, it might be spaces here in the key value pairs, and it shouldn't be. And it also might be something in the authorization as well. But if every step up until the body and the key value pairs has worked, it's probably a space in there somewhere.
I was able to get the message sent. I just had added a wrong number to your phone number.
Added wrong number?
Yeah,
Should
I had an extra 8, so I misspelled it essentially, or just I wrote it wrong.
Can you? I'm gonna write my cell phone number in the chat so you can try this again.
Oh, I was able to get it. I actually.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome.
Will we be covering what variables mean? Like if you were to right click one of the values?
It depends what you mean, because variables can mean different things, but in this case, it's the key value pairs. Mm-hmm. So this is what you, in order to send one SMS, then you need to add the to, the from, and the message. If you were to try and send an SMS and you add like a fourth key value pair, I'm pretty sure that it should not work, but we can try it. So for this specific API and for this specific part of the API, this is how you communicate with it. But if you wanted to access data from an API that contains data about trees, then you probably have to ask, or then you do a GET request, and then you have to ask for different parameters. So you would how to explain this? When you have an Excel file and you want to find different data in that Excel file, then you can use different filters. And then you have the name and the address and the telephone number, and the only thing that you want is the email address. Then you can filter everything else out. And that is how you do a GET request to a different API, depending on what you're searching for. So the most APIs out there, not everybody, because it depends on how many people have created the API. Is it just one person? Then it might not be a good IKEA instruction manual for it. But most APIs have these kind of docs that will tell you based on what you want to do, it will tell you how to do it. So if we wanted to make a phone call, this is the kind of post request, the URL that we have to do a post request to. And it also explains the parameters, and it gives us different examples on how to do that. And then you have to have a voice start and a webhook. Does that explain your question? So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so I can have a look in the chat if you guys have any questions there as well. Oh, so it doesn't work for Enrique. You get the 403, an invalid key message. Oh, it works. Okay, cool. Awesome. Nice. Does anybody else have any questions? Because this is all that I had to go through. But as I said at the beginning, this workshop is for you guys. So if you have any questions, me and Anna will try and answer them as good as we can. And otherwise, please just send us an email afterwards. You can find us on our website and under the support part of the website, then you can find all of us. You can find the CEO and me and Anna. We're a tiny bunch of people, so you can ask anybody questions. And Brittany has my information as well. Nice. So does anybody else have questions? Or do you want us to, you can write in the chat if you want to, if you want us to stop the recording and then ask questions.
Will this be available